in the house. This is a hard one. It hurts me that she won't talk to me. It hurts, it frustrates, it makes me think there's something wrong with me. Now I'm really hearing it. I'm listening hard now. I think there's something wrong with me. You know, so I think I'm a failure a lot of times if my teenage daughter won't talk to me. Boy, now my homilies, my mind's working. Love your neighbor as yourself. What a connection we got here. You know, the guy's losing confidence that he can talk to his daughter. And he's feeling that something wrong with him. He's not loving himself. Boy, now we got some grist here for this homily. Now we're going to have something to say maybe we haven't said before. So, whatever the setting, see, the idea of we get our focus points planned for months ahead of time. And what you can do is keep them in mind, and you pick up all kind of things as you go along. That's the sort of remote preparation that goes on. Anyway, any other questions or comments, fill-ins on this stuff? Yeah.
Well, it's got to be a unique situation in your marriage.
Of course, in some ways, but I think it can be replicated. There's absolutely no reason why any preacher can't get a group. One guy was just telling me he runs his homily by his wife. You know, there's no reason why this can't be extended. I gave a talk to this priest in the Bronx, and they were telling me about it's impossible. You know, you can impossibly, there's people that come out of their house for a meeting afraid they get shot. You know, my idea was, well, do it over the phone. You can do it over the phone and talk to, you could call 5 people. Say, here's a reading for Sunday. Let me tell you this. And it's been, you know, I'm concentrating on this love of neighbor part of it. You know, what you said, you get much out of that? You can do it that way. I don't think it's impossible for anybody who's serious about getting into it to make it happen. Wife, family, kids, neighbors, or setting it up. I mean, there's other people around that want to talk about it. There's other deacons in the same locale who would like to get together and prepare. Maybe parishes could do what we do. Staff thing. I always recommend it. We do it every Monday.
That's what I meant though.
Yeah.
You're unique and you're a parish.
Sure.
There's a few others, I would think.
How many parishes here do anything comparable? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, in other words, it's not totally unique. We got at least 5 that do something comparable. And they're not university parishes. Therefore, it must be at least possible to do something along that line. And if one decided that would enrich one's preaching, then somebody could take the initiative and try to organize a group. Get a group together once to discuss that Monday night before the following Sunday that wants to come to your house or change houses and read the scripture. You know, we do it real simply. For our luncheon thing, there's no preparation. What we'll do is Xerox the readings and then Xerox on the page a commentary on it. And when we get there, people bring their lunch, and then we say, okay, let's take 5 or 10 minutes here and read it. They didn't do any preparation. We read it over, read the commentary, then we say, now let's discuss it. We talk about 20 minutes. No preparation. And a lot of people might do that. Come over to your house, have it there, talk about it. Okay, shall we go on now? How's your energy level? We're going to take one more break and stop at 12, right, Joel? Let's go a little longer. Okay? All right, now there's the question of structuring the homily. We've got to focus. We've got a whole bunch of ideas, right, filtered in from commentary, from experience, from our own reflection, our own prayer, and so on. Now I got to sit down and organize. How do I put it together? Well, the first thing is the classical people are going to do it different than the contemporary people. There's not one way of doing this. Okay? So I would say that that's the first thing. Am I going to organize myself first, as I say, identifying the meaning, the focus point of the Scriptures, and the Christian tradition, the church teaching, and then apply it? Or am I going to go vice versa? And that will determine my fundamental structuring of the homily. Now, whatever, after you do that, so to say the classicist is going to say, okay, love of God, love of neighbor. I've got it, I'm going to talk about this. This is the way I'm going to retell that gospel. And I'm going to tell it in a way so that people can actually feel what it's like to be there. So I'm going to tell it in these terms. Look, Jesus was going about and he tried to preach good things to people, and he was always trying to, but he had opposition. He had people who didn't like him. And a lot of times it was the religious establishment, the religious authorities. And even really good people didn't like him, like Pharisees. The Pharisees were a very good group of people. Shouldn't let ourselves think they're bad people. The Pharisees are among the most religious people around. They were serious about the law. They were lay people, and they tried to live it out in their daily lives. Good people, these Pharisees, but they come up to Jesus, and they try to trip him up. Why are they doing that? Because something about his teaching they don't like. It's outside the confines of their own outlook. He starts talking about forgiving enemies even. There's something strange, and he teaches with authority. He doesn't say like, well, Rabbi so-and-so, Rabbi so. He teaches with authority, and he says, here's one of the most authoritative things he ever said. Love God and love your neighbor. Love God with everything you got, and love your neighbor as yourself. So, this classical person begins to put together some way so that it grabs you. And this is what the church has always taught us. Charity is the first virtue, the most important virtue. So I put it together that way. And then I've got to say that, okay, now, after that, what does this mean to my congregation? This has a message for the fathers out there, for all the people in the families, all family members. A lot of times it's hardest to love family members, so they get on our nerves. And that love of neighbor means somebody right in your own home. Husbands, I know all kinds of husbands who are at work, they're terrific. Their colleagues all say they're kind and nice. The women they work with love them. And at home they're a favorite. They don't talk. The wife, I can't understand it. We go to a party, talks to everybody. He's like this. We're home. I don't get it. Love of neighbor extends to one's spouse, to kids, teenagers. Okay? So, we're putting this together, organizing material around a coherent whole. The other way, we're going another direction. Now we're talking about, this loving others is a tough business. It's a hard thing, this loving other people. I mean, a lot of times that we can get envious. Envy can get in the way. I know there's some collegians, young women who find themselves envious at girls who got boyfriends, and they've been out running around all the time. And now they got a boyfriend, and by golly, they feel envious, and I can understand that. I know some of the parents, I was talking to some parents lately, and they said how hard it is to get along with their young people. And it's almost like they'd rather not have them around. Hard to be loving in that situation. So now I'm saying, and then what? Can't leave it go at that. Can't just let that teenage girl go like that. Can't just live with that envy and leech you up. When our Lord reminded us of that very clearly, love your neighbor as yourself. Look what he's got there. Love your neighbor as yourself. Losing confidence, that's what causes these hard to love over people. We're not feeling good. we're not feeling confident. The Lord was a marvelous psychologist. He understood. He didn't just say, love God, love your neighbor. There's a threefold love here. Love God, love your neighbor, and love yourself. And I'm telling you, there's a lot, for a lot of us, the first love we need is loving ourselves. Because if we don't feel good about ourselves, if that father does not feel good about his role in the family, he's probably not going to deal well with the teenage daughter. Why is it that sometimes spouses won't talk to one another? A lot of times it's because they're feeling guilty or feeling inadequate. Well, I know one guy won't talk to his wife about religious matters because he thinks that she's so much more religious and he feels inadequate. Love of self is at the basis of loving the neighbor. See what I'm doing? In other words, I'm trying to take the experiential base and let the others shed light on it. Now, whichever way you go, classic or contemporary, you got to end up with an introduction and a conclusion. You know? And we've got to end up with material that fills in all of this. And just to say, I say, you don't start with the introduction and the conclusion. They come after you've worked out the rest. You don't write the introduction or homily first. You write it last or second last after you've figured out what you're going to say. Problem, I think a lot of times people write the introduction first and never connects in whatever went next. The only way to avoid that is to figure out what is the body of it, what's the whole content of it, then find some introduction that fits it. A story, an example, personal experience, but it's got to fit in. The end, it's no, just telling a story doesn't mean anything. The question is, does the story illuminate the problem? Does the story help us understand what the message of Jesus is all about? So you have to link it in. And then the conclusion, as David Buttrick likes to say, the conclusion's got to conclude. In the conclusion, we don't bring any new ideas in. There's no new material in the conclusion. All it does is bring it together. It stops it. And hopefully in a way that will let people to continue to reflect on this, to go back. Or one of the devices I try to use a lot is to come back to one of the scripture quotes. If I've been talking about all this and then we finally get this, been struggling with this, Jesus preaching this, and what are we going to do with this? Here we're gathered here for Eucharist, and as we walk out of here, what we really ought to keep in mind is what the Lord said. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Bingo. So that's one way of doing it. Seems to me is to come back to the main idea, to one of the scriptural phrases, images, and use that to pull it together at the end. Again, hoping that stays on the topic and reinforces all of it. So that's the structuring business here. How we put it together. Then there's the question of filling it out. Now I think what we're going to do is take a break. Another 5-minute break, and then we'll wet it hard. When we're looking for background material, commentaries, and so on, those two that I mentioned in here, Preaching the New Lectionary, I think it is the New Lectionary, that's a book, and it covers all 3 cycles. And then Monica Helwig is a book, Gladness Their Escort. And then we have other services that are sent out. That is, they will come out in periodically, like St. Anthony Messenger has one, and Modern Liturgy has one, and there's all kind of them. Those are not books, but services. And I don't have the addresses for them, but those are the other things that we use. Gerard Sloyan has a book. And I can't think of the name of it, but there's a number of books out like that. Well, it doesn't help you for me to say that, but I mentioned at least 4 names, actual books that you could buy. Fuller, Helwig, Charles Curran, and then we've got the other services. that you subscribe to, and they mail them to you periodically. Yeah.
You haven't mentioned William Barclay. He has a series of books out. What do you think of those?
Yes, I've seen it, and as I recall, I was not impressed, and I didn't use it. I don't think anybody on our staff uses it. And I don't have clear impression remembrances. Do other people use this, William Barclay?
Yeah.
Well, maybe I ought to relook.
The New Testament, the Old Testament, has lots of
New Testament, good, yeah. First, yeah.
Father Kenny Morgan, where he wrote, whole Jesus in humbly suggestions
Right.
for all three cycles of his are brilliant.
Yeah. Ken Norman, as everyone knows, first-rate scholar and wonderful preacher. When we need a guest preacher, I always try to go after him.
But he's not an expert because he's
That's right. He's wonderful. And, and I know he mailed out those to all the priests, I know. Did they go to the deacons too?
Yeah. Well, the newer guys have.
Yeah, the same. Yeah. Is that right? Very helpful. Ken Norman, I'm sure that he would be glad to share those. And I always say that his strength is very often the technical. He's very into the Greek New Testament and the meaning of words and so on. Yeah.
How do we find out about these services you're talking about? Like, where are they? How do you order them?
Well, who gets any of them? St. Anthony Messenger. Okay, a lot of them get them, so maybe if you could get him a copy of, the address, mailing address. Who gets Modern Liturgy?
The Liturgical Commission, Lansing, Michigan is living there.
Yes.
Okay, so it looks like others know that those addresses. You can get them from them, okay? Yeah.
Do we have a library that we can go to in the diocese to get these? To subscribe to all these, you're talking $400 or $500 a year.
How much like for St. Anthony Messenger?
35 for the weekly.
35 a year?
Yeah, weekly.
I think that most of those are around 30 a year. But the answer is, do we have anything in the library anyplace?
The Resource Center at the diocese has some of that stuff.
Resource Center at the diocese in Spielbush?
Yeah.
Spielbush Avenue? Can I go on? Okay. I've termed this, the next part, filling out the homily. The material that goes into each of these segments that we've got here. Well, my major thought on this is that we need in homilies good descriptive material so that when people hear it, it brings them into it. That is, it resonates with them. They can see themselves in it. And that's what I've been saying all along, that, if I hear this guy say, my teenage daughter is, I feel inadequate because I can't talk to her. If indeed that captures something that a good number of fathers feel, and I say that in the language that he used, then the fathers present are going to say, yeah, that's right. They might be asleep. Oh, what's this? Yeah, it must be talking to me. See, that's the clue. That's the single most important way, in my mind, to draw people into the homily, is we must describe a concern, an existential question, something that's in their gut, something they're feeling, and describe it in such a way that they say, yeah, that's me. What's going on here? That's me. Now I'm ready to hear something about it. The technical word for that is a good phenomenology, a good description of the human situation. I want to begin to explore that and so on, and how we go about that. The first thing is, of course, is to listen and to feed back, as I've been emphasizing. Okay? Now, when we do that, we have to be conscious of the fact that there are men and women out there. Men and women's experience will be very different. Just let's take this love your neighbor as yourself. There's two kinds of problems involved in that. One is pride and one is low self-esteem. In other words, one problem is I love myself too much. I think I'm at the center of the world. I got all the answers to the world's problems. If everyone just listened to me, everything would be great. And that's how I deal with people. That's typically in our culture a male problem. But as we have found out, women looking at the same thing, women who hear a homily like that say, what's he talking about? That's not my problem. Being overbearing. No, my problem is lack of self-esteem. My problem is I feel inadequate. I'm afraid to talk out loud. I'm kowtowed by my strong males. Now, what that tells me, if I'm preaching on this, love of God and love of neighbor, I want to say things that are going to hook in both groups. I want to say this love of neighbor is hard. I mean, for some of us it seems to be like there's a pride inside of us, like we know all the answers and that, we're running the whole show here, and it makes it hard to be compassionate because we seem so much smarter than those other people. Or we seem like they're out of it and we're with it or something. Now, I'm not going to say that's a male problem. I'm just going to throw it out there. And I know from experience that a lot of males will resonate with that if they're honest with themselves. I do feel that way a lot. At work, I feel that way. I'm the boss, and a lot of times I really don't think those people know what they're talking about. That's true. But I want to also say, for others, this problem of loving the neighbor really is a problem of self-confidence. I don't feel good about myself, and therefore it's hard for me to love others. I'm more worried about what others are going to think about me. That's the difficulty. And because of that, now what I hope to do is to hook in the others. Now that's going to be predominantly women, but there'll be some men who go on one side and some women on the other side. It's not black and white, but predominantly. But if I only do one of those descriptions, I'm going to lose a big part of my congregation because they're not going to recognize themselves in the problem. Whatever the existential concern, remember you got to ask yourself, what's the existential concern? What's the real life problem? How do I keep my kids off drugs? Or how do I enrich this marriage? Or how do I find meaning in my job? How do I find any purpose in a world like this? How do I deal with a world of terrorism? Whatever the problem is, what we've got to do is to make sure that everybody in the congregation feels it, knows the problem, is into it, recognizes themselves in it, so that they see the challenge. And when that happens, then we're ready to hear whatever Jesus has to say about it, whatever the Christian tradition says about it, whatever the gospel says about it. And I think it's true whether you're classical or contemporary, the same thing is there. People feel the application or feel the concern. And we do that through good phenomenologies, good descriptions of what is going on. Now, the great thinkers help us, I think, to do this. How am I going to simplify this? Well, I can say this. One way is that we can describe what's going on in our hearts. We can say that, this envy thing, it's true. It really can get in our way. We can feel it inside. We have a word we say, we're green with envy. Green. Oh, jeez. I feel green. Green with envy. So I might be talking about that, what's inside. Then, the other kind of description, and this is valuable to know because as you do your phenomenology, you can say, if I touched bases here, sort of. The other one is how we are in the world. It's hard to live next to a person when they always get the breaks. Everything goes their way. They don't seem to have any problems or troubles. They don't seem to work that hard, and they get all the breaks. And a roommate never studies. She always goes out and parties Thursday night, and yet she gets better grades than I do. Now, this is a way of what we say of being in the world, being in relationship, not just what's going on inside of me. And finally, in trying to fill this out, is the question of symbols, of finding the way, the symbols that collect this. This is, again, you ever notice, if you come up with a good image in a homily, that's what people will talk about. Like, I remember one time preaching on Jonah. The problem was escapism. That was the human concern, our tendency to escape, whether it's watching soap operas or whatever. So what's Jonah into? Jonah's into escape. It's on a boat. Takes off. You know, he's going to get away from God because he doesn't want to preach. He's into escape. This is the Jonah syndrome. The Jonah syndrome. We all know the Jonah syndrome. We're trying to get away from God. Trying to get away from responsibility. Leave the family. Take off. Don't do a good job at work. The Jonah syndrome. That's right. Well, I mean, there would be people in the week afterwards, Jonah syndrome. You know, you can picture it. It's a kind of boat thrown in the water and the whale eats them up. It's a Jonah syndrome. You see, what happened there is I got a symbol that described what a lot of people feel. I mean, if someone's sitting there wasting time watching a soap opera, they're feeling, oh, it's a Jonah syndrome. Oh, yeah, I got to get my books out here. Wow, who wants to be like Jonah? Whale will come and get you. That's right. The whale will come and get you and spew you back on the land, and you'll be out there preaching in Nineveh. Now, a lot of us are not good at this. A lot of us are not good at finding images, symbols, or whatever. There's a clue, though, for those of us who are poor in what I just said. The image is already there in the Scripture. It was in the readings. Reading was from Jonah. I didn't have to make it up or be a poet or anything. The image was there. Good, we got a bunch of them. Good Samaritan. Kingdom. Someone just told me the other day the kingdom symbol worked well for him. I was amazed. I didn't think it did, but I found it very interesting. See, effective preachers find metaphorical language, imagery, examples, and stories that illuminate, rather than saying there's 3 points. 1, 2, 3. Intellectually, here, get it. This is a didactic sermon. You're going to learn this. There's 3 points about the Eucharist. Christ is really present. We should go every Sunday. And this. Well, that's one form of preaching. It's a top-down approach, but it's not very effective. What's really happening is, and what ought to happen is, we're not giving moral rules to people, and we're not telling people something they don't know in some way inside themselves. What preaching is about, this is the second part of it, so don't get lost, the good phenomenology, okay? The good description. So people are linked into the problem, into the concern, into the challenge, into the joy. And now, what does the Scriptures do with that? The Scriptures don't give us 3 points to deal with it. The Scriptures give us metaphor and symbol. The Scriptures illuminate the problem and transform it. Love your neighbor as yourself. There's the key. There's 3 loves. Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. The love of self is absolutely crucial. We got to love ourselves so we're not too proud and we're not too self-effacing. God helps us to do that. We love ourselves, then we can get on. That's right. Jesus was right. And if we can say it in such a way, the women are sitting there and the men are sitting there and they're both saying, that's right. That's what I got to do. It illuminates the problem. It illuminates the human condition. It lights up what life is all about. And then not only does it lighten up, it suggests another way of living. That's what the parables are about. The parables suggest a whole other way of being human, of living in this world, of relating to God. It's an odd way. It's a way in which people who work 1 hour get paid as much as those who work 8 hours in the blazing sun. It's a crazy world in which a father who told his kid not to take off with his inheritance, and he blows it and runs around with loose women and comes back home. It's crazy. The father runs out and praises him and says, let's have a party. That's a new way of thinking. That's a new way of being. That's a new way of living, where forgiveness is what is at stake, not envy. Not envy of the girl who got the boyfriend, but a new way of being together, living in harmony and so on. That's what the Gospels do. That's what the Scriptures do. They don't give us 3 points. They tell us a story. They give us a metaphor, an image that lights up what life is about, helps us understand who we are and how we relate, and suggests ways to transform it. That's how I think it works. We're not in a pulpit pouring something into empty vessels. We're trying to elucidate, bring out what's already there. God's, as Ronner said, we're knocking on the hearts of people the door, thinking we're going to get in there and bring them God, and God's already in there. God's already in there. What we're trying to do is attune people to that. Okay, I think that's Ken, you were patient.
I just wanted to mention one thing that I said was brought home to me, that when you are preaching to an audience, that you must look at it, especially in a divorce case where you have 50% of the audience that you're speaking to probably are divorced, and so you have to be careful in how you handle it.
Exactly. You got to think of everybody. I mean, Mother's Day is a good example. Think of the array of emotions, which one has to give a nod to. This is an emotional day for people. Some people are feeling great gratitude for their great relation with their mothers. Other people are just suffering a sense of loss. Their mother, the first year they've had to deal with the loss of their mother. Other people have a horrible relationship with their mothers. And all somehow we have to find a way as we gather for liturgy to find healing and a way of expressing it. But I don't want anybody to be left out. My phenomenology has to be inclusive. A lot of things what I will do is to try to encourage people to link themselves in. There's this problem of not loving our neighbor. And I try to work on it and say, maybe it's because, it's a neighbor, it's the one in my family, maybe it's the person next door, maybe it's the enemy of the country. I give a whole bunch of, but all of us got to figure out for ourselves, who's the neighbor that gives me most trouble? Stop and think. Which neighbor? Pick one out. Pick out a neighbor, someone, the hardest one for you. Is that person in your own house, neighborhood, somebody at work? Pick one out. In fact, let's take a few seconds of silence. And we'll all try to figure that out. Me included. Think about it. In other words, I would look for ways to try to draw people into the problem. If you're sitting there saying the whole time, yeah, love your neighbor, boy, he's right on, I'll tell you, Sam there, he hates his neighbor, and he better, I hope Sam's listening. Sam listening? Well, tell him, preacher. I hope he isn't, is he here? If he isn't, he should fill things over. The whole trick is to figure out how we're in it as the preacher and how all the people are in it. The message is for all of us. So, to me, we'd be light years ahead here if we could think in those terms. I want to say, if you have a good description and you know something of the meaning of the Scriptures, and you can use a story or use an illustration or an example to bring it out, there's a good chance you're going to get a fusion. A good chance that it's going to come together. And I think that's the heart. When I go around giving workshops on preaching and talking to lay people and so on, what do you think about the homilies? Problem, it's up there or it's back there. Two images. I don't like the preaching, it's up there. That means it's abstract, it's conceptual, it's out of my experience. Or it's back there. It's back in those biblical times where they got sheep and goats and kings. I frankly don't give a damn. One time I heard a preacher, a well-known theologian, I won't use his name, and he gave a brilliant homily on marriage and covenant. Marriage is a covenant. And he asked me what I thought of it. And I said, that is the most brilliant expose I've ever heard of the covenant theme in the Scriptures. But it won't play in Peoria, and it won't play in Bowling Green, where I was at the time. It won't play. You get some guy sitting out there who's struggling in his marriage and so on, this beautiful idea. He's sitting there and says, I'll give him a covenant. He ought to come and live in my house. That's the problem, you see. It was brilliant expose of the Scriptures, but it didn't link in. In other words, people didn't feel the existential concern. What we want is for people to say something like, boy, when you preach, I think you can read my mind. Or, boy, you really brought into my consciousness what I was feeling sort of vaguely. Or as the students once said to me, we think you sit in on our full sessions. Or you're overhearing us. That's the kind of thing I think we want. We want people, when they hear us, to say, he knows. He knows. He knows the human struggle. He knows the human condition. He knows how hard it is to put the gospel into practice in life. He knows the cross. He knows discipleship. That's what I think we want to be happening. Instead of being abstract, out of it, aloof, apart from it all. He's in it. He understands what's going on. That's all my thing here about it. I should say a little bit more about the use of stories. I think it is not so simple as just saying use stories. I suggested this before. There's a lot, it's tricky, I believe. First of all, the story has to have a point. We ought not tell a story just to be funny or to ingratiate ourselves or have people smile or something. If we're going to use a story, it's got to make a point. It's got to illuminate something. It's got to help us understand the problem or the response in the Scriptures. So the stories have to be pointed. I think also that there's at least a caution in using personal stories. No, we say a lot about deacon preaching and so on, and deacons being family people and being drawn out of that. I would suggest a great caution about saying things like, well, my wife and I were doing this and that, and we did this with our teenager and so on. Now and then that might be all right. In preparing for this, I talked to some lay people and some nuns and people about, deacon preaching. One of the things I heard was a lot of use of personal stories, but sometimes almost embarrassing, not appropriate. I was told, well, I better be careful about giving concrete examples here, but generalize. The stories almost embarrassing, too revealing of family life, here's what Buttrick says. But if you want to read somebody that's so super cautious about using, he says we should never use personal stories. Never say I. think that's off. I think that's going too far. But there is a caution. About you can do the same thing. You can say the same story without I. You got your personal story about your wife and dealing with your daughter. Fine. You can say it objectively. There's situations where a husband and wife get together and they talk about it and they can't get agreement and they have to try to get a consensus because then otherwise they can't deal with the daughter. You can view it real graphically without saying, my wife and I. I think we should be cautious of it. We also should be very cautious about using material we hear in counseling. Very cautious about saying, well, some wayward soul came to see me the other day. And they said that their problem was greed. And they had inherited, they're arguing with their sister about the inheritance. And it's obvious that they have to hear the message of Jesus. Well, there might be somebody who knows who's in problems there. And besides that, there's people out there who are offended by it. I keep looking for indirect ways. I think it's much healthier if somebody says something like this when I preach. He knows, I don't know how he knows, but he knows. That's different. What Buttrick says that every time we say I, like I did this, that people response is not to get the message of what the point, but to make a value judgment on us. So if I say, well, this guy who has been offending me constantly by saying I'm a left-wing pinko theologian came to see me and I said to him, forgiveness, brother, peace, shalom. Well, what happens is, the people say, boy, Father's really great. He forgave that guy. And that's not, of course, what preaching is about. We're not there to Christian, forgiveness, look at me, shalom, buddy. So, we've got to be careful if we use a personal story that it does not have the purpose of ingratiating ourselves with the congregation or just getting a laugh or whatever. It has to have a point. And I think that caution about, I'm not against that, and I do that myself. At times say I, like I was driving and this guy didn't like where I was driving and stopped me and he used all this abusive language and so on. I remember doing that recently and it did have a point. I forgot what it was. Probably a bad sign. I see that. I don't have any problem with it, but over and over and too revealing, and if the net effect is people are saying, making judgments about me, I'm either good or bad, then I've missed it. Okay? So caution with that. Caution with the stories we use about others. Sometimes the preface, sometimes I'll use, I've been counseling this woman for a long time, and she wants her story told because she thinks it'll help others. So I'm going to change the name, but here's what she says. Those I alert people to the fact that this is a usable material. I think that's a legitimate thing to do. So I'm going to use the story. Stories are great, narrative theology, stories light up, they often explain themselves. You don't have to. Jesus used stories, the Bible used stories, narrative is the way we live. That's all true, but a caution. And especially some of the feedback I've gotten from people about deacon preaching along that line. Now, humor. I happen to think humor is good. Buttrick says we shouldn't use humor in homilies. Is Buttrick a Protestant or a Catholic? You're right. Father Burkhardt says we should use humor in a homily. Is he Protestant or Catholic? take the course in the spring. Catholic imagination. There's a Catholic imagination. Really right. There's a way of seeing the world. It's all grace. And if you're not an alcoholic, you can have a beer. And if you're not into gamblers anonymous, we can have fun gambling. Because the world is grace. As it says at the end of the Diary of a Country Priest, all is grace. All is grace. Well, that's a Catholic sensibility, which means that every story, everything we encounter, everything we study, humor, sadness, or whatever. Okay, let me say something about the delivery. The language, it's interesting. You notice how Jesus, how little churchy, liturgical, synagogal language he uses? How little? Stop and think, read the Gospel. How little technical language there is, almost none. How little church language there is, almost none. Talks about birds and flowers and kids that take off, and fishermen, and farmers and housewives. Great thing for us to remember. You know, we can't be in the pulpit using the technical language of the Christianity and expect people to understand it. We cannot talk salvation, redemption, revelation, grace without explanation. That's a technical vocabulary that most people don't understand and don't care. Original sin is in the same thing. Can't get up in the pulpit and say. In fact, we cannot even do that with the word God. We cannot simply say God in the pulpit without explanation, because some people, or say God is our Father, because if you get up and say God is our Father, there's some people out there who are thinking, that bastard, Father, he's the guy who beats my mother, he's the guy who drinks too much, who sexually abused me. You got all kind of people out there. The word God is loaded with baggage. And how do you get around this? I believe the way you do it is you describe the reality. The one in charge of this world cares about us and loves us. This one comes so close to us